In the last couple of movies, we learned how to use if, else, and else if in order to control which parts of our code will actually be executed according to some conditions. And we'll appreciate the power of that once we actually start having some real code to work with. But we should already understand the basic structure and the idea that code gets executed if a statement is true, or maybe there's an alternative to happen if it's false. We can construct some fairly complex comparisons in that test statement that the if tests. And I want to examine those in a little more detail now. Let's say that we have a couple more variables. We'll make it c equal to 1, and we'll make another one that's d equal to 20. I could put together a more complex comparison that looked like this. Now what we've got here is one set of testing, which is A larger than B, and a second set of tests, which is C larger than D, and they're connected with the AND operator. It's a logical operator. It will return true to the if statement if both of these conditions are met. So if this expression evaluates to true and this expression evaluates to true. Now we also can use the word and here, and that would work just as well, but this is the more common way that you'll see it written, and I'd encourage you to stick with that. So if A is greater than B and if C is greater than D, then execute A is larger than A and B and C is larger than D. So let's go ahead and make it so that A is larger than B, so they're not the same. And let's go ahead and load that up in our browser and just try it. And it comes back with the original A is larger than B that we had up there. It did not come up with anything different for the second section down here, which should have returned 2 lines to us. Now if we switch these, and we were to make sure that C is larger than D, and then load it again, you'll see that it comes back and it does tell us that both statements are true. Now, in addition to be able to check whether something is true and something else is true, we can check for whether something is true or something else is true. And the logical OR operator is going to be these 2 lines like that. So 2 pipes, that's what they're often called. They're straight up and down lines on your keyboard. 2 of those in a row are going to be OR. So it lets you know if this is true or this is true, then it should execute. So let's go ahead and switch our variables back. We've got A larger than B. Let's switch it back so that now this one is not going to be true, but this one still will be. So let's go back and change it so that the second one, the comparison of C versus D, is no longer true, but the first one is, the comparison of 5 and 4. We'll go back and we'll load that, and you'll see that the AND that we had set no longer executes because it's no longer true. Both of those conditions are not met. But in the third test that we do, where we ask about OR, one of those 2 is true. Either A is greater than B or the other way around. And in this case, A is greater than B. Now we can still combine those with else's as well. And we could have it say that in the case when neither one is true, if we're testing for OR, if it didn't meet either one of the conditions, then we can say neither A is larger than B or C is larger than D. Make sense? Think about that for a second. It may take a little bit to get used to the kind of logic here, but if we say that either one is true, do this, then if we get to the default, which is else, then it must mean that neither one was true. They both returned false. So therefore, we can safely assume that neither one is true. And we can go ahead and plug in different values, and we can test that. And you can use else if, you can string these together, you can nest them inside each other, you can have if this and that, or this and that, and you can go ahead. You're going to use the parentheses to group them together, and that's going to help you and PHP to know what the groupings are and how those should operate together. Let's go ahead and look at 2 cases where we might actually want to apply these kinds of if statements in a very useful way before we move on. I'm going to go ahead and just put in some more code here at the bottom. I've got a first test, which is using the is set that we talked about earlier. Remember, we were looking at Booleans. We were checking whether a variable was set or not. So we've said if A is not set, because we prefaced it with the exclamation point. So if A is not set, then set it equal to 100. And then give us the value back of A. Now, you'll remember way up here at the top, we set A equal to 5. So when we run this, A is set. So it should still equal 5. It won't have changed. If it weren't set, then it would have a value of 100. And we could also say if A is an integer, which it is, then set its type equal to string. And then we could echo back and get the type of that to see that that's true. And let's save that. Let's go back to our browser and just try those. And you'll see that sure enough, it comes back with A being equal to 5. And the answer is that it converted the type to a string. If we went ahead in here and put in something that said unset A, we know how to do that. And then we reload the page. Of course, A is now equal to 100. So that gives you an idea of the kind of practical applications that we're going to be using this for when we start developing more complex PHP code. Obviously, your if-then-else statements can start getting very long and very complex very quickly. And there's one shorthand that I want to go over with you in the next movie that's going to help you when you're testing a single variable against a lot of cases. And we'll look at the switch operator next.